Will we have this podcast writ upon our meager graves? We'll find out, as today we're talking about Elden Ring on Have You Played? Hey, Andre.
Yes?
Have you played Elden Ring?
No, I go touch grass.
Jesus. Yes, you have. You wrote a piece for our little tiny website, our meager website about Elden Ring. So you've definitely played it, as have I, as have most of the people playing video games. Elden Ring. It is the most recent game that we've talked about on this podcast. It is, I think, the most recent game we're going to talk about on this podcast, at least for some
Pretty
time.
Sure. Unless something, groundbreaking drops in the next 6 months while our initial slate is.
Yeah, it is in a category of its own here. What is Elden Ring, before we talk a little bit about why it is maybe in this prestigious position? Came out in 2022 at the end of February, so just in time for the spring, an early release of the year, which is important given the accolades it received at the end of the year. Made by Hidetaka Miyazaki and FromSoft. Miyazaki was the director, of course, head writer who was steering the ship. And of course, famously, as was the case in the advertising and the PR for this game, with writing by George R. R. Martin, although Mr. Martin has made some comments about this game and his involvement, claiming it was largely minimal. Like, he did some world building and broad stroke stuff, but he has made it clear that he wasn't super involved in the final product that we got, which is an interesting divestment of responsibility or involvement in something that was so well received.
I was gonna say
not that he wasn't being critical of the game. It's just interesting to watch him be like, yeah, I didn't do too much, I just did this and this. But you know,
the biggest sign that it's not necessarily a project with a lot of George R. R. Martin involvement is that it's actually finished and has come out.
No, that's true. And in terms of the aesthetic of the world and some of the weird isms, like the George R. R. isms that are in this game, like, very literally you can see his fingers all over it, right? Like, it is it is loaded up with George. I just read Fire and Blood, and there's just some ways that he writes things or describes things, and then you look at the visual language and like the appendage themed world of Elden Ring, and it all comes together, and you definitely see where he's been.
Do you think George is a big Melania fan? I think he's like in on.
In what way?
On the bosses.
Is he in
Melania's my favorite Souls boss.
See, part of me really wonders, like, what part of it, because a lot of the interviews with him and like what exactly did he do is vague, but like, I don't know, maybe to start here, because I already brought him up, is like, what do you think he did in terms of the world building? If we want to speculate, what part of this is really George's work?
So evidently, we should maybe lead by saying, I think we're both kind of on, despite any comments we're going to be making hereafter, this is a must play game. If you don't want spoilers, tune away, go play this for 80 hours, come back. Because I'm going to start talking about spoiler stuff if we're talking about
we're going to spoil the hell out of this game immediately. And before we get into George R. R. Martin 2, we're saying this won Game of the Year last year in what was quite a surprise.
I didn't think it was going to make it, honestly.
Yeah, neither of us did.
The fact that it did win
is...
I'm happy. It is a... It's kind of I wouldn't say it's unprecedented, because Souls games have won before, but the fact that it beat out God of War did genuinely surprise me.
Yeah,
I thought
it's really odd, especially given, I don't know, the things that we talked about on our most recent podcast on the channel in terms of like narrative and the filmic
Yeah.
qualities of games and that being celebrated. Elden Ring takes a very different approach to story, and it was rewarded for it anyway. And I think that's a
So
good sign for me.
here's my take on where the George R. R. Martin signature in this world lies. I am I am willing to like put money down slash eat a shoe that his contribution is the family of gods that are at the center of the world as bosses.
Yeah, I think the
So
same
everything
thing.
that has to do with, yeah, Melania and Mikula and
Radon.
Radon and the what is it, Moog, Lord of Blood, and the Academy, like all of that built as like a pantheon, especially with the androgynous like center deity that
Yeah.
is like changing over time. And I would also add the unknowable sort of Lord of Light, the Great Other stuff that has to do with the Elden Ring and the Elden Beast, as well as the Flame of Frenzy, like all the elder gods that are apparently outside of even the ones that you see that are sort of like more vague influences that may or may not be real or instantiated by religion. Like all
Mm-hmm.
that stuff to me is very George R. R. Martin-y.
Yeah, I think that's where it
Um,
mainly is too, because the connections are just so thronesy, and the way the gods are built as these families, this family, but with marriages and siblingships, which is not unlike other actual pantheons of gods in human history, but it is very Martinized in the way it
yeah.
is written out. And there's a lot of detail, and I think in getting into and building off of the way the story of Elden Ring is presented, the story that you're digging into is largely just lore that is really beneath the surface, that's read on the way the character is designed, that's read through just a few lines of dialogue or little notes scattered around the world, right? Or the visual
Yeah.
language is you have to assume through the architecture or through walking through a certain place that this is what this connection is and this is what the lore is. You're absorbing it by being in the world, much in the way that we do in real life, right? You connect to the parts you want to. Maybe you're missing fragments that are there in the world for you to find, or they're not. And you're just learning as you go, and you're choosing to engage or not, much in the way we do as learners. Um, I was thinking
Yeah.
about this yesterday, and I was like, if the reason it feels so authentic is that like one of the bosses, Radon, and his entire story, his links to the war, and his whole area of the world being overrun with this plague, the Crimson Rot, right? All of this, you you can find, you can engage with it, but you don't have to. Radon is like someone that you pass by in your life. You go and fight him as a boss and you have this moment, this encounter, but like he's kind of like Karen from accounting or whatever. Like you can care about his weekend or you don't have to, but you're still going to have that interaction and exchange, and it's still going to leave an impression on you, right? Like that's what everything in this game is like. It feels so true to just learning about the actual world and your choice to engage or abstain from that knowledge. And I love that the lore is deep enough, but it's not all totally under the surface, right? Like there's enough of it sprouting out that you get a feel for what the story is, even if you don't go all the way in. And I love that about the way this is told. And I think that's probably the strength of what George R. R. Martin contributed to this. It's like
I will
it works on all the levels.
I will say also, so the Gurm touch is definitely in that family. I think there's like two other places that it is, which I think also sort of produces kind of like a triangle of things that are in this world that are, above the let's say like the threshold of visibility, where some things are just kind of like around and you see them, and below them I think is like all the stuff that is in the hidden side quests that you may or may not miss, so like the alternate endings, or NPCs that like you just may never find them and then never discover their stuff, or like item lore. I think the Pantheon of the Gods is one thing. And I would say to me, they're also all based around like Lanedale. There are other castles that you go to, but like the capital city is like where a lot of the core unavoidable mid and end game inflection points are.
Yeah.
And I think the other part of this that is really cool, that it's hard to like, it is conceivably missable, but I don't think it's fully like something that you're going to miss, is the round table. It's sort of like the Arthurian aspect of this, of like all the other tarnished that are chilling at the keep that you then get to interact with, who are like the other NPCs who have their own stories and are like doing stuff in the world, and you can help them or not. But there's like a hub, and the hub is very like, you know, Avalon style. And you unlock a couple rooms, and NPCs start congregating there over the game. And like, again, the degree of ornateness of that hub will depend on what characters you meet in your gameplay.
Yeah.
But it is always there, and you kind of know that it is. So there's like
it's
okay, all these people are on a quest that they feel compelled to be on for some reason, and then there are like these undying, almost undead gods that populate the landscape. And then I would say my third aspect of this that I think gives longevity to the series is like the humanoid characters are contemporaneous with you, right? They're all tarnished, and the gods are older. And one of the things that is sort of persistent in the world, and you will run into them at some point, are the dragons. And the dragons have this sort of like, they're kind of like the giants in Dark Souls 2. So they offer this like additional depth of lore where like the dragons were old when these gods were young. And so there's like so this is where I'm also like, I have a very like George R. R. Martin feel with this, with like the Doom of Valyria, where like they feel like this sort of doomed, forgotten species that is also grandiose and majestic, and they offer some of the bosses and some of the powers in the game, and there's like a whole dragon thing around them. And I'm like, these three things put together all like have differing touches of narrative design, but they form to me what is sort of the narrative structure of like what is happening, what is this world, who am I in it, why am I here, and what am I doing, which then is very freeform outside of that.
Do you think George R. R. Martin was responsible for any of the long list of banger boss
Dragon
quotes?
Names? I
This
certainly
game,
hope.
This game has the best boss one-liners in all of video games. I don't think it's even close. Like,
do you want to do? There's a high chance that our number one quote in the game is actually the same quote.
Yeah, I opened the podcast with my number one, which is "Have it writ upon thy meager grave." That shit
mine
is so, and it's I love that because it's in the context of the game. It is said to you by a guy who I'm sure when he says it is very convinced, because there's something weird about the power level and where that fight happens in the game, and you've already beaten this guy once effectively. I don't think he's convinced he's actually going to beat you when he says it. And I love it. Like the performance on it and the way that whole sequence is presented is incredible. And it's just such a, like, it really is just like a middle finger of like, yeah, you're probably going to kill me, but like, fuck you. Oh, it's so good.
I have a different number one quote then. And
I have a number two.
I hope. Is it join
the Seven King
as
family.
family?
Yeah. Which is also one of the best line readings all time. Like it is so just surreal on this weird snake guy. Yeah, it's
I don't know if he had input on that, because I imagine that the dialogue was written in Japanese first and then localized for English as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah.
And so that's a bit less telling to me. What I was gonna say is, I'm really curious how many of the absolute banger dragon names were inspired by George R. R. Martin.
Do you have your list of dragon names?
Well, I mean, number one has to be Dragon Lord Placidusax, because that's the most ridiculous name
I
in
don't
this
think I
entire
could ever
game.
actually say his name correctly the entire time I played the game.
There's so many dragons in Elden Ring, and they're all like boss names in general are like there's a degree of absolutely bonkers maximalism in every name. Like everyone has 18 titles and looks like they are like the story of their own, like the hero of their own myth. But the dragons in particular are sort of this like I don't even know what you do with them. They're just like they show up and each one is like a living myth. And so you got like you got Smaragd and Adula and Grail. You're like, these are fine. But by the time you get to Placidusax, you're like, I am full on in a Toho Godzilla movie.
Yeah.
Right now.
No,
except that I am a human being.
That fight is really like the design of it's a 3-headed dragon. A la, jeez, I can't remember this dragon's name. What's the Godzilla dragon? Ghidorah. Thank you. Goodness, I'm a fool. But one of the heads is fucked up, like it's gone. Like it's already a wounded creature, but it is still imposing, and it's incredible. The fight wasn't too difficult for me the way I was playing, but just the spectacle of every single encounter in this game and how they very quickly, with like 1 line or 2 lines of introductory dialogue that comes after going through a zone where this thing is located, where it's environmentally telling you the story of this character before you get to it through the world, and then whatever few lines are uttered to you, it's just you understand the essence in this fake history, in this real lived in fake lore, and what this character is about, their pain, their suffering, their aspirations, and why when you stand in front of them, they are doing what they're doing. Like it's all so clear, and God, it's masterful and it's impactful. Like some of those lines, like you really do. I felt really sorry for Morgott, right? Like the have it writ upon thy meager grave guy, because I knew I was about to one-shot this gentleman. Like I knew in my bones. and there is an argument to be made that even in the way he's talking, he's like, well, maybe he actually did deserve to be Elden Lord. Like he certainly thinks so. And it's said just through the way he's talking to you and where he is.
And he's one of the less, like, I would say, some of the bosses in this game. Actually, a lot of, I would say about half of the bosses in this game are very tragic. Like, they're kind of people who are fighting you in spite of themselves.
Yes.
And half are, I wouldn't even say that they're Machiavellian. They're just kind of forces of nature. They're just like these giant animals or like natural like deities, or they're undead, or they've gone crazy. And
I actually think the general vibe across all of the bosses is that they've lived through, they are survivors of many eras of tragedy and hardship, and the world has not passed them by. It's stuck in this kind of stasis, and yet their time ended long ago, and they know it. Like they know their time is over, but they're holding on. And that's the whole tragedy of the game, is like the inability to let go and being stuck in that, the world has passed me by, but I won't let it. And it wears them all down. And I think the game conveys that throughout the whole thing in such a beautiful way. It is like 80 hours of that. If that's not your vibe, this game is not for you, because it's not just like, again, it's not a narrative heavy game, but you read it in the wind, in the grass, in the way the sheep roll. Like
there are some narrative things, and maybe now is a good time to also start talking about like our experience coming to this game. Right?
Sure,
we've been talking a lot about like the cosmology of the game, and how important it is. But we haven't really talked about how it's distributed, how people encounter it, and especially like,
or even what you do. in this game?
Yeah.
What do you
So
do? It's a fairly standard open world premise. You're dropped into this world as this thing called the Tarnished, a human who has died before, a la Souls-like genre and series.
every Souls game, effectively.
Um,
Uh,
and instead of it being more linear or slightly branching corridors that you're going through in the game, it's open to some degree. Largely, you can go where you want, although you will encounter a lot of problems on the way. But it's just like, go, and we're going to direct you in this direction. This is probably where you should aim first. But yeah, figure it out.
yeah. That's
God,
pretty much it, really.
God, it works. And,
There are,
yeah,
well,
go ahead.
it works. Depends who you are, really.
Yeah. That's what we're going to get at. It works for everyone who voted at the Game Awards, and it worked for me. But again, let's start with, how did we get into this game? Like, how did you come into this thing?
Well, so I heard about this, I think the first time it was announced at E3. God, I can't even remember the year right now. And it was just like a shot of like a hand on a string instrument. And like many people, I lost my shit. I was on a bender of playing Dark Souls games. I own a collector's edition like box of Dark Souls 3. It's like my favorite game all time, probably.
Yeah.
And Bloodborne was really high on my list. And I really loved Sekiro as well. And so I was like, even though I have, Sekiro will maybe talk about at some point, I have some qualms with it, like there are some imperfections. I was in, like I was really, really in. And not only was I in, but the hype going into this game was unreal. Like, I was also getting on TikTok at the time, and like TikTok was replete with this. Every demo video was about this. Every YouTube creator I followed, every outlet, like just everything was about Elden Ring for like 6 months prior to this game coming out.
Yeah. And then after.
And then I rearranged my life around the release of this game. Which, yeah, so that's where I, up until the point I booted the game, that's where I came from surrounding this.
Yeah, here's
what about you?
Here's where I came into this game. I am a Soulsborne fan, although the only game I played to the end is the first Dark Souls. In the era where it was released, I have played all the other ones though, but I didn't finish them. Life gets in the way sometimes, and these games are long and they are to some degree frustrating. And so I think they take a pretty strong commitment to actually like, I'm going to get through this. And so I was excited that there was another one of these. I'm glad that they keep making them. I think they are all to some degree like masterful and a kind of game that we need more of. They just weren't for me, and I didn't really have any hype going into this one because I didn't really get through any of the last ones. Through Bloodborne I didn't finish. Dark Souls 2 and 3 I didn't finish them, although I did like playing the parts that I did play. I was just like, am I going to invest any time into this, because I don't know if I'll finish it, and I kind of would like to. And the moment I booted this game, and why did I get it? You were like, this is going to be great. And I saw it pop up everywhere. And I was like, I have a bit of time now. I have more time in this slightly post-pandemic era of my life. Like, I'm not teaching in Japan. I'm not, finishing my undergrad or whatever. I actually have a bit of space in my life to get through a game like this. And I booted it and I was like, immediately, I'm going to finish this.
You were in love.
I still am.
It's rare.
It's one of my favorite games.
I think in the 7 or so years that we've known each other, I think this is the only time I've seen you react this way to a game of anything. And there are games that you really, really like that I've seen you enjoy, but this was something different.
Yeah, and I'll talk about why it captured me a bit differently than the other Dark Souls games did, I think, as we go on through this. But like,
yeah,
it does a lot of things right for the way I like games. I like them to breathe. this breathes. Like
Yeah.
it gives you a lot of space to go at the pace you want. There is a lot of build diversity, although if you're metagaming a little bit, there's much less. But as anytime if you're metagaming, there is much less than is designed into the game. Um, but
So maybe
I booted the
this is a
game and I
good.
loved it. You booted the game and what happened?
Well, so this is an interesting point based on the article that I wrote for the website, last year, which is really, I think this was our main like first point of contention was for all the reasons that you didn't jive with Sekiro and Bloodborne in particular, I would say, is why I felt overwhelmed by
Yeah.
this game because I was like I ended up really loving all the sections in the game that are much more structured and city-like.
Mm-hmm.
So I love Stormvale Castle. I love Lanedale.
Yeah.
I love oh god, the area with the Dragon Lord in it, which I'm blanking on
The city
now.
and the
The giant,
tornadoes. Yes.
yeah, the giant Colosseum.
It's amazing.
Sort of at the end of the game. So like all of the places that are much more structured and built like dungeons worked for me. The open world I initially liked, and eventually I was like, I need to know where I'm going because I like having a sense of more directed progression, which is really not what this game was built to do. And so I think there's fundamentally, I think people who ended up a bit more on my side of the sort of review spectrum, which is like this is a masterpiece, but maybe it's not the masterpiece for me,
Yeah.
started off of that.
Yeah.
I do think there was a second thing that happened, which has to do, you kind of, gestured at with sort of your build choice and the metagaming aspect. Except that I feel like I was vindicated months later by one of the patches, which is I had a terrible time with how the combat felt in the first days of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And so I played about 22 hours of this, and I had to restart entirely.
Yeah.
I was short of where you start getting like skill tree reset points or like stat reset points. So to me, I was effectively stuck in a playstyle that I found really unenjoyable, which I had loved in previous games. So for context, I play with ultra great weapons. I love things like the Moonlight Sword. I love things like Zweihanders and Claymores. I love big weapons that stagger and that reward you for deliberate rolling and generally don't allow you to block as much. So I feel like blocking is the superior mechanic in Elden Ring compared to dodging and parrying. And so I was like in a build that didn't really get access to blocking because it was two-handing a weapon. And Ultra Great Weapon swing time, stamina usage, damage, and poise damage was so bad that it was nearly doubled about a month and a half into the game's life cycle. Like the company kind of acknowledged that entire play style, which included, dozens of weapons, axes, swords, maces, spears, just wasn't good. And so I feel like I in the dice roll that you do when you're not metagaming, and I was like, I'm just going to play the thing I've loved playing in the franchise for all these games, was like one of the worst archetypes to play. And it made the game feel really bad at a moment-to-moment style for me. And particularly so because the bosses are very fast and very aggressive compared to regular Dark Souls games, which I do feel like it incentivizes you to play faster weapons or faster abilities, really, than what was available to me in that.
Yeah, so I like dodging in games like this, and I wasn't punished for it at all. I love that I could dodge in pretty much every fight, and that's how I played through the whole game. I was a caster for most of it, which was slightly overpowered, I think, to the point where I kind of wanted the game to be harder at times, but I was still happy with what I did. I don't feel like it's a lesser way to play that game or anything. I was either going to do that or like Sword and Board, like Sword and Shield, standard Dark Souls. Here we go, because that's how I played through the first Dark Souls, and I liked it. But I had read prior to starting the game because in the other Soulsborne games, the magic castery stuff tends to not be super good. And I heard that it was actually playable in this. And so I was like, I'm going to do that because that's fun and that's different. And that's probably going to contribute to me finishing this game is just variety. Because in Sekiro, which was the Soulsborne, if you would call it that, it's from the same folks and it has the same DNA. Really, there's one way to play that game. And it is as a melee fighter that parries a lot. And
there are tools, but functionally,
yeah, there's tools,
really
but the core is really the same throughout that. And I just bounced off it because I was like, I'm kind of tired of doing this. I would like to do something else. And that's been the case in all the Soulsborne games for me, except for the first one where it was new and novel.
Surprisingly, magic was very, very good in Bloodborne as well. But
I
don't know if it was good.
I don't think I played it.
It was
that
good
way.
when the expansion.
I was doing more of like the weapon switching stuff and which I did like.
Yeah.
It just I didn't like it enough to get all the way through it. Where in this, I was just in. I was immediately in. I was having a great time the entire time I was playing it. And when the game ended, I was like, yeah, that's probably the right time for this to end. But if there was another 20 hours of this, I probably would do it.
Yeah, I will say the amount of spells that exists in Elden Ring it was
awesome.
Kind of obscene.
There was always something around the corner. And because there's not only one like castery type build, there's like your mage glimmer. It's called Glimmer, right?
Glintstone.
That glimmers from Midnight Suns. And there's the faith-based build.
Well, even in that, I would say like, you know, your mage stuff has crystallions.
Yeah, and there's builds within
frost.
the builds. There was always something around the corner and a different way to change what I was doing. And I just loved it. It carries you so easily through that period of time in the game because you get to mess around with your build and your stats. And casters felt really supported in a way where normally in these games you're unlocking new weapons, but the spells are in short supply. In this, there were just so many spells, and I was always excited to get a new one to find out they weren't quite as good as the one I had, but it didn't matter. It did not matter.
It was still fun.
Yeah, it's still fun, and it's still something new to play with, and you want that in this kind of game that is not a full sandbox, but that is sandboxy enough. You want to bring your little bucket and your shovel, make your sandcastle. If they don't give you enough buckets and shovels, the sandcastle's going to look the same. Going to be bored, going to want to go home.
Well, you know, I felt like my bucket my bucket existed, but my bucket was made out of like concrete and was really hard to drag around.
I also almost did like greatsword at the start of this.
It was the maximal trap.
I was so glad I did not.
It is for listeners, because you know how bad it got, but I think I was like in kind of an angry rage for like 2 days because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to keep playing this. It was so unpleasant that I thought I was going to drop the game. Despite loving almost everything else about it, I was like, fundamentally, I'm so angry that like I can't play this game the way that I want to play it. And then that, again, after so many years of this being the case, katanas were like it wasn't that I was like actively searching for like metagaming knowledge, but like everyone was talking about like Moonveil katanas and like how arcane dex scaling.
You can metagame.
And for people who will read the article, my life became much better the moment I said, you know, screw it, and I opened the wiki and I was like, what exists? What is a goal for me to like? I need to tier goals for myself in this open world so I can have things to chase. And yes, I know where they are, but I don't know how to. You know, I know which cave they're in, but I still need to navigate that dungeon, beat the boss, find it. There's still like exploration for me. But now I have like a path to a weapon art or a spell or an armor set or something. And eventually I'm no one to judge people for playing casters because I ended up playing with the Rivers of Blood katana, which was the other like broken as hell build early on in the game, which was like bleed stacking. And... You know, I will say the game felt much better when my katana that was dex-based had 4 times the range of my greatsword, was faster, and didn't care about armor resistance on enemies.
Mhm.
suddenly the game felt much better to me to play.
Yeah. I think there were definitely better or worse ways to get through that experience.
And there are people who did some amount of mixed stuff. There were like lighter weapons, rapiers were fine, whips were harder to get off the ground, but eventually became good. This game did really, really, really reward you for hybridizing stats as opposed to doing what you tend to do in things like Bloodborne and Sekiro, which is like really optimizing one stat for a very long time. Like this was you kind of want 2 or 3 stat groups at the same time. And there was also the the related sub game of the ashes, right? Of like getting your summons, and sometimes you could really lean into that or not so much depending on what you were doing.
Yeah. There was so much that you could do to craft the character you wanted to play. And God, that went a long way for me.
Yeah, basically, I think the difference between us was I ended up playing the same game as you did, but with like a 22-hour extra boot attached to myself, where I was like, everything I'm doing is like behind like those 20 hours of extra play that did not feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And those are never going to go away from me. They're always going to be there in a way that they really aren't with any of the other Souls games, where I feel like the pickup was much more seamless, even when I wasn't playing great weapons or whatever. And I think there are some bosses in this game that also really tested my patience and made things, let's say, it's a bit of difficulty.
Did you find, before we get into which ones those might have been, did you find that was any more the case in this game than the other ones? Like,
yes.
Yeah?
100%. I will, a year out from this game, almost, right? We're 11 months out from this game. I think if you were somebody who played Melee, and I still played Melee all the way to the end of the game, I'm going to, put an asterisk for Malenia, because I find that like aberrant bosses that are like considered the hardest boss in video game history by a lot of people deserve kind of a special tier of like, we're going to talk about those on the side.
Yeah.
This game has by far the hardest bosses of any Souls game, period. I think if you are counting the hardest boss of each Souls game, Sekiro has a boss that is, I think, second only to Malenia in difficulty. Mm-hmm. But on average, I feel like this game really cranked up the speed, aggression, and zoning of bosses, such that if you weren't playing at range, it was like terrifying to play this. And I'll say this much. It took me, I want to say, my partner was here at the time, so it was a full evening. I think it took me about 5 hours and a half to beat Margit the first time. And it was like getting absolutely demolished by a boss for multiple hours until you like just brute force learn all the movement patterns.
He's basically the first boss of the game if you're going in order. Like it's hard to not fight him first, I think.
Yeah, and I will say this, he was harder for me than Godfrey, who is the actual boss of that castle. Like the entry boss for me was worse.
Godric's the boss.
Godric, sorry. So Margit, who is a semi-boss, was actually worse for me than Godric.
I think this was the case, though. Like, based on what I was reading after playing the game, Margit seemed to be much more of the, like, check on the whole game of, like, you need to figure this out or the rest of this is going to be really, really, really unpleasant for you.
Yeah. And effectively what happened was when I got my builds together, I blasted through a lot of the later bosses in the game. Not all of them, notably. But I think that the first half of the game is much harder if you're playing in Melee. And that 100%, like, that's going to be a difference of opinion that we have based on the experience of play that we had, which was I kind of decided to play that way, but I felt like the game was punishing me for it, which isn't really the case in the other Souls games. Like the Melee punish bosses are very late in the game. They're kind of end game punishers. Yeah. So for example, if people play Demon Souls, the remake or the original, the boss that punishes you for being in melee is the penultimate boss in the game and is optional and is in the swamp of sorrow, for example. Whereas here it's really like, yeah, they're early on, they're really fast and they hit hard, and then like the Crimson Rot bosses that are in Caelid are not that far into the game either. They're still like in the first half of the game.
Yeah, I think the thing that playing it ranged really gets you is like there are bosses that punish ranged, right? There are, but for most of them, just don't play it ranged and use your skills anyway. Like that's what I did for most of the game, where being at ranged was any kind of detriment. I just play it melee and you're fine. And so my one complaint about the game, there are two main complaints about the game, but one of them is that honestly I thought a lot of the bosses were a bit too easy, and it's not a flex. I know I played this at ranged, and it made the game a bit easier. Like I know it was like, oh, it's the cheap way to play. Whatever, it's the way I wanted to play this.
I don't think it's cheap, and I think if the tools exist in the sandbox, then they're part of everything that's fair to use.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But like for me, it was like a flavor thing. I was locked in, and
a way that we've talked about this that I think for readers might be for listeners might be a really a different way to conceive of this is there's been a lot of complaints that Elden Ring, despite being more friendly to newcomers, is not an accessible game, or that it doesn't have a difficulty slider. Arguably, the builds are the difficulty slider.
Yeah,
and deciding to play a slow weapon with extreme wind-up time and vulnerability in a game that is fast and aggressive is a liability. And, it's on me. I made some choices.
Yeah, but it's much harder to access that than a difficulty slider. Like you have to understand what it does to the whole vibe of the game, and you have to really think there are other options. There are ways to respec my character, to change the things you've invested into so you can play a different way. And also there's the thing of like not knowing how much easier being at ranged would make the game most of the time. I had, again, other than Millennia, our perennial champion of difficulty of this game, the only other fight that I would say, like my version of Margit that you had, is the Red Wolf of Radagon, a mini boss, another mini boss. I was like, this is the hardest fight in the game for me. There was something about the tempo of that fight and the way he moved around the room that made it so difficult for me to actually kill him. And I died when that guy had one hit left, like 3-4 times.
Like, and I think I texted you about this.
Absurd.
I think you were kind of prodding me because you were trying to not spoil bosses from the Royal Academy to me, and you were trying to prod and I was like, I had just done Renala, and you were like, oh, have you done the hard boss? And I was like, yeah, I did Renala. She wasn't that hard. And then you were like, no, the other one. And I was like, oh, the mini boss that died in like one try, and I had like half my potions.
Yeah, but that's what Margit was. I had heard so much about how hard Margit is, the first boss of the game, the one that Andrei struggled with, and he fell over for me. I killed him the first time, and I was like, that's fine. But that's not to say there weren't other harder parts of the game. There definitely were. But, clearly there is a bit of in a game that is this open and there are a lot of different builds, it is hard to quality control the vibe, especially like the Soulsborne vibe, which is supposed to be punishing. It's supposed to be really hard. You're supposed to beat your head against the wall a little bit until you understand. You're supposed to suffer as much as the characters do in your battles with them. And that didn't deliver except in like maybe 3-4 fights. There's a lot of fights that I really wish were a little bit harder.
So conversely, I will say I found most of the fights to require, not the mini boss. So I'll classify this as, zone bosses. So like bosses that are in caves or out in the world, they're bosses, but they're not like particularly difficult, or they're not like necessarily unique bosses. So like the Crystallian dolls, right? You meet one, it's hard. Then you meet two, it's like not that hard anymore. This by the time you meet three, you're like, ah, it's fine, whatever. Even if they're in the same fight. Or like the Briar Rot Knights, they're not bosses, but they're really hard. Those were like fine-ish. And then there's like the mini bosses that are unique. It's like the Red Wolf, and then there are like the main the main story bosses, like the gods that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And I would say of those gods, the sort of the major bosses that you vanquish, almost all of them felt difficulty appropriate to me. There are like when you meet Morgott in the capital, he felt a bit easy. Like that's the redux of Margit.
Yeah.
Probably because I spent like 6 hours just training on the base moveset.
Yeah.
So I was fairly like okay with what he was doing.
Yeah, he felt really easy.
On the other side of the scale is Melania that took me about 16 hours to beat. And that felt like absolute hell to me. And I was like, I may never beat this boss. And I eventually got it, and that was the last thing to do in the game. And then everything else felt like an absolute, like the final bosses felt like a joke compared to that, because that boss is so exceptionally tuned higher than everything else in the game that like after you beat it, everything else seems like you're on a reprieve.
Yeah.
But most everything else felt like it took 3-4 tries, I would say, on average. And I felt like I was progressing and learning every fight, and it took me like like an hour and a half for each one of those in-game zones.
Yeah,
I was like,
which is probably actually a healthy level of difficulty.
Yeah. The Dragon Lord also took a while. His patterns are very wild in terms of like speed and angling, and he's very cool, but he is very hard. Conversely, like my number 3 favorite boss, which is the other dragon, which I think is the only boss that you didn't see out of the main ones.
Yeah, I missed it. Completely missed it.
Lich Dragon Fortisax. Not very hard, extremely cool in terms of like move pattern and design and everything. So I'm like, I remember it fondly, even though it's not one of the harder bosses.
Well, that's the thing too of like, I actually don't think you need all of these to be completely like spirit breaking. I think it might actually be better that some of these are like 1, 2, 3 attempt bosses. They're memorable anyway.
Yeah. So I want to have a discussion about the hardest boss discourse around Melania, and then I want to talk about some of the other bosses, and then we can talk about like other stuff in the game.
Sure.
Melania, right? So we both fought this boss before we got to the end boss, like the going back to the capital boss.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And I remember that we had some discussions about it, which were kind of like, I was extremely frustrated fighting the boss, and you were like, this is finally like the amazing challenge I've wanted for this game to give me. And then you were kind of sad after. It felt like we were like, shit, I kind of wish like I don't want things to be this hard, but I kind of wish they were a bit harder now, because this is kind of like spoiled me in terms of like, it's hard to go back, right? It's like you're on the highway and you're driving 150 and you go back to like a suburb where you're on like a 50 kilometer and you're just like, I'm antsy. Like this is too. It's not enough.
Yeah, I would say I'm glad she's in the game. I think the game probably could have used a couple other fights. Although, but again, everyone's mileage may vary on this. Where like I know a lot of folks with Dragonlord Placidusax, if that's that thing's name.
Mm-hmm. You got it right.
I got it right. Jeez. Had a really difficult time, and I'm it was somewhere in the 5 to 10 try range of like, I made a mistake after the learning attempts. I was like, this is on me and I need to focus, and I focused and I killed it. It's like, it's fine. Whereas like Melania is in a different sphere, but I know a lot of people had that same thing with the dragon, and I'm like, it may be that the game is actually balanced as it should be. Like it is the game is the way it is, and if I don't get exactly what I want out of it, it's okay. It's okay that I didn't get another Melania fight, even though maybe by the end of the game I wanted one that's both as memorable because man, she's got a lot of character in the 3 lines she
She's
says.
extremely cool.
And
This is not a contention. Like that, I'm in full agreement. She is awesome.
God, what a badass. Like, she's fucking rad as hell. Yeah, in terms of difficulty, maybe I wanted another kind of wall or something to throw myself up against,
Something in between that.
But
and
again, Malekith,
the
Black Blade, was another one of those where I think for most folks that was, or at least for where I've been reading,
it was a very hard boss for a lot of people.
It was a hard boss for a lot of people, and for me, it was 3 or 4 times. Like,
it was 2 for me for that one.
Like, it wasn't that bad, and I had heard trying to keep spoiler free on forums. So, just wait till you get to this thing. It's really hard, and I was like, it's okay.
The consensus on that boss was if you're playing a ranged build or a build that can stagger, which Rivers of Blood did have a shit ton of stagger, it was like, yeah, you're going to explode the boss in like 2 combos. So it really is about dodging a little bit and then doing your combos.
Yeah.
Whereas Dragonlord, for me, if you're not ranged, getting to the boss is incredibly annoying because the whole arena is just filled with the Dragon Thunder stuff. So I'll say this. One of the discussions that we had that stuck with me for, the last like 8 or so months about this is the placement of Malenia in the game, and the fact that you can actually get to her, I would say about 80% of the way through the game. Maybe a bit faster if you're not doing like where the Lich Dragon is. That's the underground ant zone. There's like multiple quests around there. Or if you're not doing the Lord of Blood zone, like the Moog Lord of Blood zone, those are like optional, so you can kind of skip them. And so one of the things that occurs is she is, in my head, the actual endgame boss that is in other Souls games, but she's also not. Mm-hmm. So the comparison point always happens between her and Orphan of Kos in Bloodborne, who was the Malenia before Malenia, a nascent elder god who beats you to death with their placenta.
As you do.
Yeah, Souls things. But that boss was extremely difficult, and it was post, oh my god, Spirit of the Moon and Gurman, who were the bosses of the main game, who were much, much easier. They're kind of on the level of Radagon and Elden Beast, right. Kind of a similar thing. Sekiro's final boss is doable. It's oh my god, it's the like your cousin who is the other samurai, and then the old samurai master, Ishin. But if you've done all of the side quests, Ishin is Malenia. And for a long time, Ishin was the boss that like a lot of people considered had taken the mantle from Alma from Ninja Gaiden Sigma as like the like overtuned, crazy 19 mechanic high-speed boss that will just blow you up if you miss any kind of input. And I remember I beat that boss at work in our lab while one of our colleagues made fun of me every time I died, and it increased my blood pressure tenfold. And it took me like 8 hours of standing up in front of a screen to beat it. And those bosses all share a thing, which is they're kind of locked at the end of the game. They're kind of like, not only are they the last boss, but you have to do extra things inside of the game to even get them to spawn. So if you don't know, you might complete the game, quote unquote, and never actually run into them. And she's not. Like, you can run into her way earlier, and I think that really changes the vibe of the game, because you're like, I really want to complete, the overworld map and see all the places, but I'm going to run into this like roadblock, and then the rest of the end of the game is going to be much easier, and it's going to feel like a weird situation where, for example, if you got to that tree and Elden Beast was inside and Malenia was the last boss at the end of the game, and you beat her and you're done, I feel like I would have felt more of a sense of accomplishment and less of a sense of exhaustion and apprehension with completing the last like 10-15 hours of the game that I had left after that.
It's an interesting point about what the end of this game is, like that the choice of boss through the end, because the last thing you fight in this game to me is actually one of the least interesting things that you fight in this game. And they even could have, so you basically fight 3 things in a row, And I think the game is actually better if you just cut the last one and make the thing in the middle much harder. I think that actually would increase the vibe.
I really like the mid boss. You're talking about Radagon.
Yeah, that's so
Radagon
cool.
is, well, the first boss is the one outside, which is the that's Horalu, right? It's the
Yeah,
barbarian
which is
boss.
also
Yeah.
really cool.
Cool boss, great boss. Radagon, I think, is really cool. Elden Beast, surprisingly enough, I know you and I rip through it. That boss also has like a Dragon Lord Placido Sax reputation, where people spent like entire days trying to beat it.
It wasn't the hardest boss for me, but I didn't have like an easy time with it. It took me a
That was
while.
like a. It took me like I think like 20 or so tries on Radagon, and once I got through it, I beat that boss on the first try. Because it is actually
We had
like
the
that
opposite.
boss.
Radagon did nothing, and
So
then the dragon was hard for me.
Elden Beast has like incredibly limited melee patterns. So if you're up on it, it does like almost nothing. Which is like that's kind of
Hmm.
there's like a this also happens in Demon Souls where the last boss is actually like kind of inoffensive.
Yeah.
And it's like a non-boss to tell you that like to kind of show you how the cosmology works. Whatever. Now, what I do want to talk about is the bullshit boss design in some parts of this game. And it is really located at the world boss and mid boss level, mostly. Like
It really is.
I accept that like Melania is hard by design. Like
Yeah.
it is the maximalist. We're going to create a living nightmare for players.
She's your ultimate weapon. You don't have to fight her if you really don't want to. You can go enjoy the end of the game.
One of the things that I have always that people I would say but also there are sufficient people who are detractors of this that it has gained a design nomenclature which is called gank bosses. Gank bosses are, ganking is a thing in MMOs where players will show up while you're fighting something else to kill you from behind in a surprise. And so gank bosses have a reputation for being bosses that are double or triple. And so I hate bosses that are like, we're going to take this one monster or one boss and we're just going to put another one of it. So for example, I love Clean Rot Knights as a one-on-one fight that gives you Crimson Rot. You learn the moveset of the knight, you beat them, they're great. Double clean rot bosses. The difficulty is not in the fact that you're fighting one of them and they're hard to beat, it's that you're constantly getting hounded and you can't properly block. Same thing for my most hated boss of the entire game, the gargoyles.
Yeah, they're the worst boss in the
twin
game.
Gargoyles.
There's no competition.
They are truly heinous, and they've overtaken any dual boss in the series for me. And I will say this, Sekiro has one gank boss that there's a boss that has multiple enemies, and I do want to differentiate, like a boss that is built around a council type fight, like 3 mages that do different things, is a bit different than just putting 2 of the same thing that you fought before. So Sekiro has like a gorilla, and then you fight 2 gorillas, and I'm like, that's lazy to me. This game has so many of them. There are twin Godskin duos, twin gargoyles, twin Clean Rot Knights, twin Dragon Knights, twin dragons, twin Beastmen, multi-Beastmen. Like it goes on and on and on to the point that if you're doing most of the caves, which I did try to do kind of a completionist playthrough on my first run,
Yeah.
I would say there's about 20 gank bosses in the game, and they are consistently the worst fights of every fight in the game. Like all of them are, to me, cheapened, artificially tuned dungeons that maybe just shouldn't exist.
Yeah, they're mechanically bad. They don't have a lot of story in them. Like they're just regular grunts out in the world, and they suck up your time in an annoying way. So please stop making these. I think I would rather the game have been 5 to 6 hours shorter and those not have existed. What would be a cooler thing to do? Just make like a recolored enemy, like make a gargoyle that looks slightly different and give it a different move set that I have to learn that's in like a room that looks like a boss room. Like do that instead. That's like, even if it's functionally the same as doing a duo boss, it feels much better.
And I'll add to this that sometimes when I talk about these gank fights, I should also specify that some gank fights are single boss fights, but they're like the boss fight that you did earlier, but now it's in a closed room and the floor is magma. And I'm like, okay. So the difficulty is actually just like the positioning is now like really annoying for me, or it's on a ledge, or the room is filled with a gas and I don't have space to move around. Um, like the Erd Tree serpents that show up, there's like so many of them in the game, and the annoyance is generally like the first one's really hard because it's so fast and like spastic, and then they're like, what if you fought three at a time? What if you fought one in a Crimson Rot zone? What if you fought one while there's another boss, like the Erd Tree avatars, that's like shooting spells at you from the other side? And I'm like, I'm good. This was not necessary for me to further dislike this.
Yeah.
That said, they don't account for a majority of them, and I think my eventual approach to them was I'm just not going to fight them. I'm going to go somewhere else. The one exception is because I was doing the going to Lich Dragon Fortisax route, I had to fight the twin gargoyles. They're part of that storyline if you're doing it in order.
Yeah,
you cannot avoid them.
I think that's the worst part about that fight is that the one thing that this game also has that the other Soulsborne games really don't is there's a lot of stuff that you can just kind of walk away from. And the gargoyles are an exception. Maybe there's a path through the game where you can avoid them.
There's a different path away from them that if you understand how to do it. I looked at it like later and I was like, okay, I understand there's a different way to do it. But since I was doing the that death, because that's the
in
sort
the
of Dark Sun.
In the way the game guides you, it seems like you cannot progress without going through them. Like I really felt that way. I was like, the game clearly wants me to be here. Like this is the tale it is weaving for me, and so I felt like I had to do them.
And again, I'll give an example. Like the later on in that same quest line after the gargoyles, you fight an array of summoned tarnished. So you fight like one tarnished, then two tarnished, then three tarnished. But the boss is like all six of them in a 1-2-3 pattern. And they're random. So you get like random fights. And it's sort of a, Argent Crusade gladiator fight in World of Warcraft. Yeah. That it's still got like the positioning shit, but at least I'm like, it's random. It's about like adaptability. It's not about me getting canned by these two gargoyles, which the community collectively agreed the best way to fight was to drag them off of the waterfall where the collision makes them fall into a hole and die instantly.
That's the kind of gameplay you want to encourage your players to discover to get through the game.
So I think that's like the worst part of the game for me, and maybe it's gotten better. Like there have been many patches, so I don't know if they've been like de-intense, like maybe they've been nerfed, maybe they're not so bad anymore.
I will say there is a degree of maybe openness to the quest design in this game where it, at least at the time that we played it, which was on release, it was like there are certain characters that you can talk to in this game, not a ton of them, who have a fairly like go to this specific place kind of quest line to talk to another character and do a thing, and you have zero indication aside from some loose text on where to go to find any of this stuff. Oh goodness,
we played it before, so now they have icons on the minimap, but we started playing when they didn't. And so there were some quests that we just lost track of.
So I mean, problem solved, I guess. So I guess it's not a thing to worry about now. And to be honest, it made me nostalgic for like the Morrowind era of gaming, where like I know a lot of people were really frustrated with this. I was only kind of frustrated with it, and then I was really nostalgic for old PC role-playing games that didn't tell you anything, and I was like,
you love that. You love games that are very
I like the idea that the game doesn't think you're stupid, and that you are agreeing to explore, like, and part of the exploration is maybe you actually just can't see this wolf guy in the tree or whatever. Like, I I get that it's really frustrating now, especially when we're really habituated to like there being markers and UI elements for every single activity on the map, and that the map is overloaded with activities because they want to keep
Hey,
you in the game as long as
no pot
possible.
shots at
So you
no
keep
pot
doing
shots.
microtransactions. Like, I get that we're all in on that and that we're used to playing in that particular way, but it was really actually nice in the inconvenience to be like, oh yeah, we used to just open these games and be like, hey, where do we go? And then we used to talk about it online. We used to send a message to be like, hey, I don't know where to find this thing in Morrowind. Where is it? And someone will be like, yeah, it's between these 3 trees, past this rock, past this tent. And you'd be like, oh, cool. And you'd follow it and you'd go find it. And that's what I was doing to find the people on this quest. And I was like, this to me is such a nice way to communicate about where things are in the game or how to play it, far more than like metagaming builds and calling other people scrubs for using certain weapon types or play styles. I was like, I like the jank in the exploration. It actually makes me feel like I'm an explorer. It gives me the feeling of being in this weird, strange world and feeling lost in it. And frustration is part of the feeling that you would have if you're out in the world and you're like, I don't know where to go, and I'm fighting all these things and I'm stressed out. And I like that it actually produced the thing that you probably should be feeling in the world in a nice, safe environment of my living room.
So this is, and I think this is like one of the divergent points for like why you enjoyed the game versus why I had so much trouble with it, which I think at the time I even sent you a message, which was kind of like, I think I'm just in for like Assassin's Creed design. I think like, despite the fact that like my brain understands that that kind of like telegraph design is sometimes a bit limiting in what it does on a mini map, I enjoy opening up a plan, and like I have a map and I know the 22 things that I need to go do on this map. And how I approach them is freeform, but they're there. And once I did that with Elden Ring, I opened a wiki map and I knew where the shit I wanted was. The game became much more enjoyable to me. And I think that's primarily like if this game is read as like a, we're going to get you to do exploration that is terrifying and unsafe and unmooring, and you're into that, you're going to enjoy this game a lot. And if that's daunting and anxiety inducing to you, this game will be debilitatingly stressful.
Yeah, it's going to feel that way. My thing about why this game is so special in that respect is that these days we get so few of these, and so many games are in that Ubisoft, like, we're going to assume you're clueless on what to do in this game, and we're going to point you to everything. The game doesn't breathe. We want you going from objective to objective to objective. I probably spent a couple hours just riding my little donkey or whatever this creature is.
The horse yak.
Yeah, this beautiful beast. Just riding it around and being like, oh, that thing looks scary. Or like, oh, that thing in the distance looks like a place I want to go, but maybe I'm not ready yet. I don't know. So I'm just going to go flop around this beach. Oh, that's scary. And that doesn't really happen. Like when I played through, I don't know, another game released in a similar time frame, AC Valhalla, for example, I was just like, I'm just ping-ponging from location to location to location to get bits of story that I wasn't really into, and the world felt so artificial. They're all artificial, but
yeah,
that one feels artificial. Whereas this, I was like, this whole apparatus is telling me a story, and it's making me feel weird and stressed out in a way that like great horror movies can do, in a way that going on a walk and getting lost can do. Like it's so specific, and I was like, God, this is special. This is so special. And I suppose we've talked a little bit about like the bosses and like more of a review kind of angle to Elden Ring, because I think it is very like recent, but like this podcast really is about like what sticks with you. And the thing that this game did, regardless of its legacy or whatever, when I turned this thing on, I was just like, man, this is special. I have not played something like this in a long time, and I wish I did. I wish there was more of this, which I guess kind of begs the question, what do we think the impact of this game is going to be? Because, most games coming out this year, next year, the year after even, have been in development. Like,
Yeah.
the impact of Elden Ring isn't a thing we're going to really feel all the way. Although I do think, given that FromSoft and the hype around the new upcoming Armored Core game, a game that is beloved by some, but really,
But that I don't think is really going to be the same kind of
it's not
product
going to be the
at
same kind
all.
of product. But if you remember watching the Game Awards, there was
Oh yeah,
so much hype for it, and I'm like,
it was
I
reverence.
love
Yeah.
old Armored Core. But most people don't. I don't know too many people that talk about Armored Core as like a nostalgic game for them. I didn't even know FromSoft made it. Like, this is.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people enjoyed so older Armored Cores were very this is like a digression. Older Armored Cores like 1, 2 and 3 were much more like slow and mechanical in a Dark Souls way. But like I think a lot of people that I knew at the time really jived with like the last two that they did that were like very fast.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
everything was super high speed combat, like post Zone of the Enders, like aerial,
the,
like
the reason I bring this up
missile
though is
salvo
that like
stuff.
the hype for that trailer was so disproportional to Armored Core as a game, and I'm also thinking about like, well, that's clearly because Elden Ring had this huge success. It won Game of the Year here, and it has FromSoft slapped on the trailer head, right? Like,
Yeah.
but what else does this game do? Do we think? Are we going to get more of this?
So
Because I have some
I have
doubts.
well, I have like one of the things that I think is going to happen is much like our discussion over the whatever amount of time we've been recording.
3 years.
This game is it's readable along a number of axes. And I think what's going to happen, my prediction is going to be that different companies are going to think that a specific axis is the predominant one and are going to design around it. So for example, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is going to come out, and Zelda was already like Breath of the Wild was already very influenced by Dark Souls games. And I think it's going to lean into big bosses open world. That's probably going to be that would be my bet.
Yeah, but I think it
Now
was
there are
already going to
games
do that.
Yeah. Now I think other games, like the one that I saw, one of the ones that we saw that was like a horror Dark Souls game called Lords of the Fallen, I think is going to really capitalize on grim dark bosses and crypt design and like extreme difficulty. Like just absolute like run you down Millennia difficulty at multiple points through the game. There are a lot of games that are really like already built that way. And so I think it's going to continue a trend of Dark Souls DNA, sort of pollinating a bunch of different genres. But I don't think that the open world weirdness is going to be reproduced because a lot of other studios make games not for the demo of players that Elden Ring was made. Like it's not going to be made for us. A lot of those games are going to be made for people who play games not to feel unmoored and stressed out, but to relax, feel like they're dominant in the game, and to run through a lot of it.
But Elden Ring reached way outside of its demo.
That's true, but I do think that's a really hard thing to replicate. Like a good example, if we're talking about movies, is going to be like Avatar hit it big despite people thinking it wasn't going to, and then everybody tried to do 3D for years instead of understanding why it was a success, failed, and then stopped doing 3D. But like nobody made another of that kind of movie. Nobody understood that it was, the story was pedestrian and the characters weren't interesting, but the world itself was real, like the fauna, the flora, the color palette. Like those are the things that people remember some 20 years later. This is a digression, right? It's going to be like what people remember from Elden Ring is going to be very hard because it is such a massive game. It is so different to a lot of people. And I think that the aesthetic that it has is not an aesthetic that people can consume nonstop and not be exhausted by it. Like if every game was Elden Ring,
I am people too. No.
No. It's true, and I think this is a thing that we've had a talk about, and I think you're completely right to say like I'm a consumer too, and I feel unseen by a lot of the industry, and I feel like the kind of game that I like has been left by the wayside. That's a valid feeling to have for sure. And so yeah, it's weird. I have like all these mixed feelings about this. Like this is such a game where I'm like, clearly it's a 10, and clearly I still a year later have mixed feelings about it. In the same way that I can say, most Assassin's Creed games that I write my work on are like eights, but to me they're tens forever. Like I will remember all of them, even though I have like numerous critical things to say about them and to critique and to talk about professionally. I'm like, I remember them. The music stays with me. I remember certain scenes. People like different things. Games are like a culinary menu, right? And it's maybe not everybody is going to buy the $100 filet mignon steak that is like, for a refined palate, but maybe it's important that it is there for the people who want to buy it.
Yeah. Also, to be fair, whatever Elden Ring looks like on a menu, I would not order it, even though I like the game. It is probably a decrepit finger with hair on it, like
the twin fingers.
Yeah, based on the aesthetic of the game. So we kind of ran out of time for segments, which as we do.
It's okay. Maybe this is a unique game where it doesn't need that.
I don't think it does.
Maybe it's like it's a thing that I don't think we're gonna have another game like this in the next 5 years. Certainly, I might be wrong. I hope I am, because these games change things. Like they are outsized events that the community organizes around.
No, this was a moment that reached so far beyond what I think even they were expecting it to do, given like the month that this came out up until like March, April, end of April, I would say, this games culture was gripped by this. Like it was everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, are we going to get another one of those? Especially if it's something like this that is so odd. Although it's not really, because it's grim. We just went through the pandemic. Like, we're riding that wave of like, yeah, I'm tarnished. Like it makes a lot of sense that this did pop off, and clearly George R.R. Martin's stock in the wake of the reception to the end of Game of Thrones also is still okay and elevated this to punch above its apparent weight class. Yeah. Although I think Elden Ring did exactly what it should have done. It like, yeah, really, it is a quality and unique media experience. It is special.
It's gonna be an interesting thing right now. In January 2023. I don't have anything on my list this year that is like a clear analog where I'm like, when this comes out, it's going to destroy everything. There are a lot of quality games that I'm looking forward to for this year, certainly, but nothing that feels like this. And to be fair, waiting for Elden Ring felt like that. Like Sekiro was in 2019, so it was like a 3-year gap, and this was announced, I think, right after Sekiro launched or right before. I can't exactly remember right now. Even when Sekiro was announced, people were like, that's great, but when do we get the next Dark Souls?
Yeah.
Right? Like there was these games tend to come around once every 5-6 years in my head. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see anything like this again until 2027, 2028.
That's a sad thought, but I need a lot of time to write my dissertation. So, at least take 2023 off. Good games. Any last words on the Ring of the Elden?
Despite everything I've said, like I want everybody to know, like, this is in the context of me thinking that this is still one of the best games made in the last 10 years. And I'm frustrated sometimes because I wish I liked it more, and I feel like that's a me problem more than it is a game problem.
I do know. I get it.
What about you? Any parting words?
Yeah, join the Serpent King as family. It's my parting word for Elden Ring. I don't think there's anywhere else to leave it. I saw that line reading. If you're not going to play this game and you listen to this whole podcast, you just go Google yourself some Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, and watch that whole fight, including the dialogue, because I know like they don't give Oscars to games, and this is certainly not the kind of performance they give an Oscar for anyway. But the choices that voice actor made and the way the animation and character design line up with that line reading, it is an all-timer highlight of like surreal what the fuck weirdness that really only this could produce. It is the sublime. If Kant was alive, he would have played Elden Ring and he would have been like Rykard. Like, that's all I'm saying.
All right. I have no rejoinder. I am part of the family.
How could you? But if Kant was alive, he also wouldn't have played Elden Ring because he would have lived in this little German hut forever and written about volcanoes that he never saw. So
Rykard does live in a volcano.
He does. No, it's so appropriate. That's why I was thinking of him. Anyway, on that note, continental philosophers. No. Hey, we'll see you next time on Have You Played?
Happy New Year. Bye.
Bye-bye.